Hi, I'm Mara Webster with Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by writer, director, and actor John Pollono to talk all about his film Small Engine Repair. And this is a project that you've been living with for well over a decade at this point. It first came up as a play in LA in 2011, and then again in New York, I think in 2013. And so, given that you've had such a long and extensive relationship with the dialogue and with this text, and had the opportunity to see how these characters live and breathe on stage in two different iterations. When it came to adapting it for the screen, how did that influence the way that you were working with the text and working with the screenplay and the shift in evolutions and the details that you wanted to finesse and tweak for the adaptation?
I mean, that's a really great question. You know, I knew I was directing it. I kind of knew the adaptation was sort of in the back of my head. So it was a couple of things. And I was very fortunate in having, John Bernthal be a creative partner in this because he was in that first production. And, we're on Pico Boulevard getting ready to go on. And we looked and he was like, man, we should make this into a movie. And I was like, yeah, we should. So it was something we've always kind of been talking about and, throwing back and forth as I both of our careers sort of went in their own ways. And so I kind of always had it in my back of my mind. And I guess the sort of key sort of philosophical question was always, how do you harness what works in the play? There's a lot of material in the play that's battle tested, and it's been done, in LA, it ran for almost a year, and then it ran in New York with extensions. And I'd seen variations of it in different cities. I saw it in Portsmouth and, in Ventura and in Pittsburgh. It's been done all over the world, actually. So certain things are just battle tested and worked. But it was really wrapping my head around creating the film and having it have that identity. And the fortunate thing of being so close with John through the process is that I just sort of, that character became, synonymous with him. And it was written for him with his input and so all that. And then, with the Packy character and then getting Shay involved, once I sort of knew, look, there's this term in screenwriting that they use specifically with smaller movies or in terms of adapting a play, which is open it up. And a theater is contained by for a variety of reasons. The play was very contained. It was lights up, 75 minutes, lights down. And one of the reasons the play is so popular and done in so many places is because it doesn't require act two, lights come up, the stage is half filled with water. You know what I mean? Like you don't have anything like that. God, I'm losing my train of thought. So in terms of adapting, it was like, what works about the play? Characters, theme, intensity, and the sort of consistent comment I got most often on the play, which I really valued, was people were saying, hey, I was in the audience, I forgot I was watching a play. I got pulled in, and it brought me to dark places. It made me laugh at things I didn't think I would ever laugh at or should laugh at, but I found this very complicated relationship with the characters because I forgot I was watching a play. And I said, okay, well, that should be a really strong goal of an immersive narrative of the movie. And what can cinema do that theater, which is like a master scene, what can you do? And it always came down to the characters and the performances in doing that. So cracking it open, and in this case, the most sort of profound change over the play to the movie was the addition of Crystal and Karen in being, flesh and blood. They're only alluded to in the play. And especially Crystal, her photo looms over every, it's just staged dynamically in a way that she's present, but she's talked about. So putting them in the movie and making them flesh and blood characters, that was like, I felt like I had a relationship with them, off stage, but then making them. And then once they started to have their voice and started to create, it kind of, exploded from there. And then honestly, when we cast Shay, who John was really good friends with and I became close to, and I'd always been a big fan of, for months we did table work, which is the beauty, which is sort of what you do in theater. You sit down, you're like, hey, I have something here. Let's sit down. Let's just roll up our sleeves and keep working at it. So it's particularly, in particular with the relationships of those guys, I'm just working on it. I was doing that table work, their voice, their personalities informed it. I had my relationship with the characters and who they became, but it really became John Bernthal's character and Shea Whigham's character. And then quite honestly, Frank, the character I played, is so reactive to them, and they're all defined by each other. They're all sort of part of the recipe. So if one's gone here, the other one can't go here. He's kind of there. So they're all always jockeying and evening that. So it was just everybody kind of fluidly informing one another, and then throwing in the chemicals of the women and how that reacted. So, I knew the world, I knew all that, but it was, it was so cool to make it happen. And then again, bring in these artists and get to do it the way I wanted to. So I don't know if that answers your question. That was kind of long, but it was a really hard, and it took a long time. But look, it wasn't, I typically write for a studio and they say, hey, here, I'm writing the movie that I hope they want to make. And there's a degree of marketing involved with how you sell each moment. And you're like, you got to make sure that it's set up so that they get it. I mean, I was writing myself a recipe, like I'm cooking it, So I saw, I went to a WGA presentation once that Barry Jenkins did. And like, I love his movies. I think I'm such a fan of his, but one thing he had said, I had that specific question. I was like, look, how do you change from your writer hat to the director hat? And he said when he was making Moonlight, there was a particular moment where he was setting up the camera and getting a reaction of a character, and it just wasn't quite working. And then he went back and looked at the script, and the description of the script that he wrote it a year prior. He was like, oh shit, writer Barry was telling director Barry what he's missing now. Do you know what I'm saying? So I really was trying to send future messages to myself as a director down the line in terms of the creation of it, which was different than anything I'd ever written before.
I love that sentiment and approach. And you were bringing up there the character that you play, Frank, and how there's reactionary elements to him. And there's a scene very early on in the film where he's kind of said to the other two guys, like, one of the things I hate about going out with you is that everything always ends up in a fight. And so there is actually then this huge bar fight scene. And it lays the groundwork for a lot of what happens later in the movie, and the fact that he is a very reactionary character and he doesn't shy away from responding to situations physically as his first inclination to things. And so that bar fight also brings in all of the characters. It's not just him in a fight with a guy. He's the person that takes it the furthest, but there's a moment where you look around and there's 10 different characters all pummeling each other in the corner. So there's a bit of comedy as well. So what was that process and journey of choreographing that scene in a way that tells us all these different elements about so many characters, the sense of community, the friendship between these guys, but also very specifically lays a lot of groundwork for Frank as a character for later in the movie as well?
Well, that was probably one of the toughest days I felt, because we only had that bar for one day and we shot a lot. And so the key to that scene was really Eric Linden, who was our fight coordinator. And John Bernthal knew him. I mean, John Bernthal's an unbelievable asset to have in any movie, but in particular because he's that kind of guy that when you work with him, you're like, I want to work with him again. I'll do anything. So when John did Punisher, he worked with Eric Linden, who is like a sort of a Marvel fight choreographer. And, he did our film. He loved the script. He loved John. He loved what we were talking about. So the sort of the way I always sort of positioned it to him was, look, we're telling the story here. This is a character-driven thing. A lot of times in those Marvel movies, and they're awesome, but you kind of hit pause on the character development and you get in this cool fight with their given skill set, and it's like dance. It's choreography. We were very much within the theme of the film. The intent was to create a sort of dynamic bar fight that felt messy and realistic, and maybe started exciting, but then went somewhere ugly. And it's not, dodge, left uppercut, right uppercut, all this stuff. It's like a fighter like Frank would just grab someone and hit them over and over and over again, which is just kind of ugly. And it's like whoever hates the most in that given moment is the one who will prevail. So, but then taking that through the machinery of these unbelievable guys, and most of the guys in that scene were stuntmen, and they were like incredible. And they, when you do a fight, you don't hit the person, they sell all the reactions. So we had the Meryl Streeps of stunt guys to fight with. But it was to your point, which is very accurate. It was all had to tell the story. It all had to, one, show a fight that we felt was gritty and realistic and exciting, but disturbing and real. And two was to tell the story, like you said, how these different characters interact and really tell that. And also I think within the scope of the film, it was important to establish one sort of how messed up Frank is. And also to just tell the audience, like, these guys have the propensity for violence. So the tension should prevail. It's not like these guys are bankers and they're suddenly thrust in this, hard situation. These are guys who go there, like that. And so it had to lay a lot of groundwork. And I mean, I'm incredibly happy with how that came out. I mean, I think that's one of the strongest parts of the film is just how it goes. And the music we play is sort of subverts it. It's not like, hardcore rock and roll. It's a song called I Believe, which is like an uplifting thing about wanting to believe in something and how that all just falls apart for really the dumbest of reasons. And again, the directive was like, let's make a fight thematic as well as exciting and doing all that. And I think we pulled it off. And again, no small part to these guys who are like, experts. I mean, Eric does like Captain America, so he can certainly handle a movie.
I love the description, the Meryl Streep of stunt people.
Well, they are. And, you got John Bernthal is also an actor who's so deeply enmeshed in that type of acting and stuff. And I mean, I'd done some of it. Shay had done, quite a bit. But when you're in the moment, it's like, it's very stressful. It's like more like a dance or athletics and in terms of selling it and knowing where to position the camera. A lot of fight stuff is shot either super cut and then they show the fist and it's like a cheat, or it's just not angled right. And these guys, with our DP, Matt Mitchell, who is like fantastic, but he's like a former documentarian. He's like gritty, real, let's keep it in the world of it. But then working with the stunt guys, it was really a beautiful marriage where they're like, okay, put the camera a little bit here. It's going to sell this angle of the punch better. And it was, it was awesome, man. And when we watched the dailies of that, I was like, holy shit. Can't believe this is our movie.
And with the film as well, there's a huge core and heart of the film that really comes down to Frank's relationship with his daughter Crystal. But it's not just about his relationship. It's about Sueno and it's about Packy and the fact that they're these pseudo-parental figures for her in her life as well. And there's just like so much groundwork that you lay very early on in the film, which shows, why Frank sometimes feels like he hasn't been there for his daughter, where he feels like he's fallen short, particularly as a mostly single parent raising her, but also that intrinsic closeness that his friends have with her and what that dynamic is, which really allows a lot of the flow of the movie. And was that something where you always had all of those specific detailed elements coming in very early on, or was that an area in speaking to how Crystal becomes an on-camera character within the screenplay adaptation, that a lot of those elements you were really able to finesse and enhance with the female perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the female perspective, and in particular Sierra Bravo, who's the heart of the movie, and you have to fall in love with her. And when she, isn't in the scene, you have to miss her, and that was crucial. And I mean, my God, we got so lucky with her. She's such a talent. But in terms of the theme that the movie is exploring about, these men in this sort of rougher neighborhood, when they access sort of the maternal loving sides of their personalities that we all have, that's when everyone's at peace and that's when they're happiest. And it was really taking a close examination of, gender roles, especially in this neighborhood, and that like you can be a guy who is a womanizer, but at the same time has deep, deep love and protection of this woman. Well, now when she gets to the age where she's starting to be a woman, how complicated that gets, and really put that under a microscope, and where these three different men really, to me, always represent a different sort of facet of masculinity, good and bad. And when they're together, it's functional. And when they are not together, it starts to sort of splinter. And again, Crystal being the heart of it and the core of that. And she's such a strong, complex woman who can hang out with these three guys and they help shape her. Now, the film, I think, also looks at maybe what that relationship was missing and sort of where she fell through the cracks in certain places, and really holding these guys accountable. And more importantly, taking a really, really close look at that. I mean, I was, the whole play and everything really was inspired by my daughter, and having a girl and being like, having her hooks in me like I've never had any human being in my life. And, I'll do anything. And it was, sort of a play on that sort of cliche of like, I was misogynist and then I had a daughter and now I'm not. And it's not that simple, but it is like when you have a foot in the two worlds, how does that coexist? And I think the movie ultimately is a push towards some sort of progressive ideal and conversation to have, is to say, it's on a cultural level, where are we with this, and really kind of examine that. So yeah, but it all informed. I mean, it came from a place that I was very passionate about. So that helps make the creative decisions as for all that stuff.
Yeah. And within the intricacies of the dynamic between these three men, you really capture that element of their history right from the beginning, and
Right.
it stems from their dialogue and the way that they're bumping up against each other when they're talking, but also the fact that they kind of seem to know exactly what the lines are of how far they can push each other. They know exactly how to push each other's buttons, how
Right.
far they can take it, when it's comedic, when they want to say something that's really, really searing, like the moment when Frank's told, like, you know, your daughter's afraid of you sometimes. Like, you know what that reaction's going to be when you say that to someone like him with that history. And so how did you always approach all of these scenes and really think about the specificity of the fact that they can flow into so many dynamics and so many spaces with each other, and even when they're all on different pages and different dynamics within a scene as well?
I mean, I think that's sort of the benefit of the material originating in theater, where that is your bread and butter of theater. Is it's the characters, it's the relationships, it's the dynamic. And there's no drama if there's not conflict, so you have to craft characters who are philosophically different than one another. And they given anything, like those three would have a very specific argument about politics, about music, about everything, because of where they come from. And then you just start giving situations that propel the story, but at the same time deepen the audience's experience and get more and more specific. I mean, I do believe the more specific you are, the more universal it is, and the more these guys and their archetypes, and then suddenly push them towards a situation that is a very, very difficult decisions to make, and suddenly revealing their characters in surprising ways. So it's really, again, when you have a play, especially Small Engine Repair, the play, which, like I said, it was lights up. Here's these characters. Here's this other introduction, and you're just claustrophobically stuck with them. The sort of dynamic is your bread and butter of the story, and how does that translate into film? And in my case, I got unbelievably great actors who were primarily theater trained. I mean, every one of them had. Jordana had auditioned for a play that I did in New York. My wife, who plays Dottie, has been in multiple plays that I've written for her. So it was all actors who knew how to play that. Here's the knew how to listen, knew how to do that. And then it only works if you arm your characters with that level of truth and of reality. And my relationship with John is a real world friendship, so that if we play fictional characters, we can still access the trust and that dynamic of the friendship. And Shay, who John was close to and I became close to very quick, who is just an incredible actor to watch his process and everything that he did in terms of, taking on, creating this character. Packy evolved significantly from the theatrical version to the movie version in terms of what Shay brought and the choices he made. So, but again, you just, you create that map. You're like, here's the map, here's where we're going on. And then ultimately the actor in the moment is like the canary down the mine shaft. They know, if you get great actors, what's truthful and what's not, and it can inform things. Now, you don't throw the plot out, but you may say, oh, this moment that I thought as the writer, John, was truthful and real. The actor in that moment, if you trust them, they're like, no, I'm deep down this mine shaft. I'm telling you, you didn't notice this, but that's there. So, and then you just kind of let them go. And I mean, we shot a lot of stuff that didn't make it. We shot a lot of stuff that was surprising. We always went back on course. There were sort of key dialogue moments that were so great in the play that kind of keep coming back up. There were moments in the play that I thought they were like the big laugh moments. They didn't make it because the movie actually is a lot more sort of grounded. And I think that the play is more savage in terms of the language and in terms of these characters being a little less sort of grounded, but the movie, it's more grounded. It's more real. So some of those sort of like rim shots that work in theater, the jokes, they didn't translate because it just didn't feel real.
And one of the other ways in which you find to visually open up the film as well is in kind of the retelling of memories and the retelling of stories. So whether it's telling a story about meeting a girl in a bar and she said her name was this, and it goes back and forth between the actual scene of the memory, but also the narration in the present day, and going back and forth and cutting between those two moments, or the telling of a childhood memory where you have both, young performers playing the younger versions of themselves, but also present day actors in the scene as well is a really interesting dynamic. And so what was the journey for both of those types of storytelling of memories and essence in figuring out what those visual choices were going to be? And was it all something that you figured out before filming them, or did some of the details and the finessing of that come out in post-production as well?
Um, Really great question. I'm just enjoying this interview so much. Thanks, Mom. So look, I knew that I wanted the story claustrophobic and contained. Like we're in it, not real time, but kind of. So we're in it, and in the flashback, those jumps offered the opportunity to just change it visually and open it up. But they weren't just sort of tangents. They had to deepen the theme, but more importantly, lay out breadcrumbs for the very difficult decisions that we have ahead. And it was like really taking a deep dive on these guys. I mean, Sueno's story of, the jackass story he tells, which is really funny, but also shows a truth in him that you wouldn't know otherwise. And it's interesting because in the play, he did a monologue akin to that story. And like me as the writer was always like, people are going to know he's full of shit or his version of things because he's a tall tale teller. But in the movie, you get to show that, you show him, he's like, I'm out with my awesome friends. And then you see him in the back and they're not, because this is his family, these guys, and that whole thing that happened, which is supposed to be funny, but it doesn't have a full punchline because Packy takes it away from him because he's too smart. And why? Because he found out the truth in social media. So like, there's a lot of fun. If you ever get a chance to see the movie again, I'd be interested. A lot of the breadcrumbs of where we go are really hidden out there in the open. So as much as I hope people enjoy it the first run, I really think it'd be interesting to see it again, to see all this cool stuff that we kind of hid in there and layered in there. And then, Frank's sort of reveals his issues with the themes of the movie and his flashback, which is like kind of fun, and he can connect with her, but he can't because he's inherently broken for the reasons that Packy's so, lay bare. And then of course Packy's flashback, of which he's part of, it's like he's sort of stunted from that era. And what I found, his flashback in particular, was an opportunity to really underscore the theme of what their fathers are like and the sort of cyclicality of this violence and what keeps happening. And there's a lot of people getting slapped in the face, and it's really the point of that journey is like, this is something they've learned in childhood, and then they're damaged through adulthood, and they're still dealing with those things. But the story he tells is like lighthearted and fun, but then you watch it and you're like, it's kind of screwed up, you know what I mean? And that's kind of the point of it. Like, to them, it's normalized. So yeah, so it was again, here's the problem. We're stuck in a shop. How do you make it visually interesting? How do you use that as an asset and really do some other stuff? So yeah, that was there in the back, talking with the DP and everything was like, how do we make each sort of fantasy or flashback vignette visually interesting and reflective of them? So we had a lot of fun with that. We were casting the characters of Frank, Sueno, and Packy as kids, and we were having trouble finding a Packy. And then Matt Mitchell and I were just in the office like pacing, trying to figure it out. And I think he might have even cared. He's like, well, what if Packy isn't? And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. And then I went home and rewrote the scene, and I was like, it's so perfectly on character. And it was like a happy mistake, but that wasn't how it was originally scripted. We just sort of discovered that.
Yeah. And in directing the film as well, in the fact that you're directing yourself in mostly three-hander scenes, because the vast majority of the film is these three characters centered in that one location still. What are kind of like the assets that you really found from the fact that you're in the center of the scene, and so you're really able to visualize but also feel the energy and feel the temperature of a scene, particularly with what you were saying about how some of the elements landed really well and some of the elements had to be finessed and changed a little bit with the screen adaptation because they just didn't quite land the same?
That's really the core of this whole process, which you're sort of nailed, is I wanted to harness the liabilities and make them assets. In this case, it was, how do you act in your first time you're directing something and you're in it? Now, I knew the character, but I also knew that the nature of that character of Frank is someone who is stressed, at the end of his rope, and subtly manipulating everything around. And they don't all know it. And they all look to him for guidance, but he's just trying to keep it together. And that's how I kind of felt as the director a lot of times. So I just kind of lived in it. As another layer, I had one of my best friends, John Bernthal, who's an incredibly experienced actor, and Shay, same thing. Just like their characters loved Frank and were worried about him and wanted to make sure that he's okay, that's what they did to me in the scene. So there was pre-production was extra key in here. Now, when you have a lower budget movie, one of the first things you have to get rid of is you don't have time. So there's no time to do playbacks and see if you get it perfect. There's no time for that. So it's really mapping out the look of it and how it's going to work with my DP and their incredible team. And to say, look, we all trust each other. I know he's going to make it look good. Here's some visual shots. Some of it's choreographed, but for the most part, let's have the visuals be a performance delivery system and lead by the performance and the truth of it. And, look, it's easier if you're sitting in the bath to gauge the temperature of the bath than pausing it, going over and sitting your finger. So when I'm in the moment, you feel the truth. We all did. And we just gave up the trust and did it. And like I said, we had this roadmap of where the story's going. It's a very simple story. You knew what it was, and you just kind of let it go. And then, go. And then you can tell, I can tell by the way the air feels, by the moment when that actor is delivering something that's real. And then you get it. And then it's like, hey, how'd it look? Technically, we got it. I have my producers who everybody had my back. I had my friend Brad Fleischer, who's a good buddy, a Broadway actor, but also like an acting coach. I just was like, hey, get my back and just watch this monitor and, make sure I'm not screwing everything up. And then, you just do that. And if there's a big flag or something like, hey, we lost the light, something happened, someone broke this or whatever, then you go back and do it. But for the most part, we're all like, it's like theater. We're all creating a moment and keeping it real and supporting one another and doing that. And then having, instead of going and looking at playback and trying to get it perfect, it's just like, let's get another take. Let's get another two. Hey, Shay would be like, listen, I know I hit you what you wanted. I know I got it, but let me try it again this way. Sure. And you go do it. And sometimes it was magic. Sometimes it wasn't, but every actor had the license to claim their space and do what they wanted. And a lot of these movies, man, and I've shot like guest stars a ton, and you have some great stars that you work with, but then a lot of times they're like, oh, my scene's done, and they go hit the trailer, and then like the AD is reading the lines off of you, and we didn't have that case with this. This was a case like no matter who you were, you have Bernthal's outside and he's there and he's like, you got it, let's do it. It was like man, everyone's just lifting each other up in this incredibly difficult task. And the material is dark and screwed up and like, pitiless as it may have been, you always had the love of everybody to get through it. And it was always like, shake it off, let's just keep doing it. I mean, it was creatively speaking, we were in the zone. I mean, it was an absolute blast. The only thing I regret, I'm sorry, go on.
No, go.
I was gonna say, the only thing I regret is I'm not a smoker, and I was like smoking, and Shay comes up and he's like, man, you don't hold it like that, you got to do this, like early on before we started shooting. And I was like, shit. So I just started smoking like crazy. So I smoked like crazy through the production of it, and then when it ended, I was like jonesing for a cigarette for 6 months, and I mean that passed. But that was the only thing I was like actory thing that I allowed myself to do.
Well, I'm honestly so impressed by all of the different facets that you've created in so much detail with this, and it's so interesting to look at the overall journey that this project's taken with you. So congratulations on all of that, and thank you so much, John.
Thank you.